welcome to 10 Lessons Learned, the podcast where we talk to leaders, experts, ordinary people doing extraordinary things from around the world to uncover the lessons that shape their careers, businesses, and lives. Our goal is simple, to make the world a little wiser, one lesson at a time. I'm Jeffrey Wang. I'm thrilled to be your host for today's episode. I'm the founder of Sydney Professional Development Forum, a basketball tragic, and a proud father of my two gorgeous boys. Before we dive in, a quick message for our listeners. 10 Lessons Learned will always be free for you, but it takes our blood, sweat, and tears to make. If you found values in our episodes, please consider supporting the program, whether it's sharing the show with a friend, leaving a review, or checking out our affiliate partner, Audible. Every bit helps us continue bringing you the lessons that matter most. Speaking of Audible, they're a fantastic way to enjoy 10 Lessons Learned alongside thousands of audiobooks and other inspiring podcasts. Whether you're on the go or unwinding at home, Audible make it easy to build a library of wisdom. You can try it for free for 30 days at audibletrial.com/10 lessons learned. The link is in the show notes, so check it out and start listening today. Now, let's meet our very special guest for the day. Codie Comeau has joined the 10 Lessons Learned team as our episode producer. Now, Codie, you have a Bachelor in Communications, Media and Design, and you also have a minor in Psychology. You've also gained your MBA since then?
Yes. Yep. Went right through.
Awesome. Now, you've worked through industries such as engineering, entertainment, education, sales, and during your time at university, you were the president of the Graduate Business Association and also ran the tennis program at Classical University. Now, what I've noticed about you, Codie, is that even though you're young, you're wise beyond your years. I love how you're always open-minded, you're always humble, and you're always open to learning. So I take special pleasure in welcoming you to the program, Codie.
Appreciate it, Jeff. It's fun to be on this side of the camera for once, but I really appreciate it. Super excited to be here.
And for the folks that's listening in, Codie has been behind the scenes on the show for the last, I'd say a couple of years. So he's been involved in the direction of the show. He's been a keen contributor to the show. And what I've noticed is through our conversations, Codie, that there's a lot more that you have to offer. And especially, when we spoke, I realized that your life experiences actually have a lot more than what meets the eye.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's true for most people is you kind of see them as they present themselves, and we'll dive into that a little bit more, with some of the lessons. But at the end of the day, everyone has their story. Everyone has their sort of history behind them that created them in the way that they are and how they present themselves now. So definitely had quite a bit of experience growing up for sure. So excited to share.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll unpack that through the lessons. So let's just dive straight into it then. The 10 lessons you gave me. Lesson number 1, know the game, play to win. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes as no surprise that we oftentimes will say the game of life, right? It comes across as this whole thing of ever since you're a kid, all the way up until you retire and stuff, you're basically playing this game. And there's so many different components here that go into it. I almost think of it as when you're a kid, it's sort of a free trial in a way. This is where you're figuring things out. You start to kind of come into your own. But once you really graduate college or even high school, for those who maybe didn't go, this is a great time because it's your first time that you have complete, freedom in your choice. You have so many different avenues you can go. So where do you start? What do you do? And this is where the game really begins, right? And so when I say knowing the game, it is not just a game of life, but how to be successful. That's constantly the question. People always say, how do you measure success? Is it having a family that loves you? Is it being able to travel the world? Is it having a ton of money? Is it having a great career? Having a lot of acknowledgement? There's a thousand different ways to classify it. So when I say know the game, you need to understand that there's no one right way to play, right? You can have many different avenues. You can pick so many different paths. I'm a big proponent to say that in your 20s, you don't have to have it figured out, but you should at least have an idea. And from there, being able to play the game, right? You have to know how to win, because big spoiler, it's rigged. No matter which way you go, you're going to face challenges, right? And it's not falling into that rat race. If you end up in the situation where you are constantly in the same place, you're not making headway, don't get discouraged, right? That's part of it in figuring that out. but recognize that no matter where you are, most people start at a disadvantage. And so that's what I mean when I say that the game is rigged, because there's so many different avenues here, right?
So if I could sort of take that metaphor a bit, just
Hmm.
imagine a board game. A
Yeah.
game of life is almost like a board game without a set of instructions. You don't know what the objectives are, or it's up to you to define what the objectives are. There is a set of rules, I guess, but you
Hmm.
kind of have to figure out as you go. And it's almost a bit of a undefined game where you're negotiating with the players, and as opposed to sort of finite games where there's an objective where you're trying to meet. Life is an infinite game. It's as many turns as possible. You're trying to stay in the game.
Hmm.
So yeah, I guess that's a really good metaphor. But when you say play to win, how can you play to win when there's not a defined objective? How do you find out what winning is in life?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. And that's part of the fun, isn't it? Is really figuring that out as you go.
Mhm.
Because you're going to see, with the exception of a select few individuals who might be into a situation where you're born into money or, a
Mhm.
family business or nepotism, it's really about experience. And that's where the benefit of a show like this is that it's not about what you want to hear, it's what you need to hear, right?
Mhm.
And if I'm to explain this from a personal perspective, I always looked at being successful as in having financial freedom.
Mhm.
And I know I'm trying not to spoil too many lessons as we go through yet, but
Mhm.
basically the concept of being able to work because you want to, not because you have to, right?
Mhm.
And obviously you want to be happy, but how do you do that? How do you get to that point? Because newsflash, it's not going to be waking up and going to work and doing a 9 to 5 every day and saving your money, right?
Yep.
It's how are you going to get hired? Well, there's a hiring hierarchy to it, right? It's not going to be as simple as applying and then just finding a job, because you're told this promise when you're a kid.
Mhm.
You're going to grow up, you're going to get a good education, you're going to go to college, you're going to get a good job, and everything will be peachy. But that's oftentimes not how it goes. That might have been the case 70, 80 years ago. But now the game is constantly changing. Technology's changing. Opportunities are changing. Things are moving so fast. So how are you going to get ahead? Because it's the chances of getting a knockout invention or some sort of technological advancement, slim to none. So what
Mhm.
do? How do you get there? Because again, you're not going to have the know-how. You're starting from scratch. So how do you get from point A to point B? And so when there's no set defined rules, that's where the experience comes in, is figuring it out as you go. And that's where these lessons come from,
Yep.
was my game of life, which I'm still very much playing,
Mhm.
but and still learning as I go. But of course, there's so many things that you learn along the way that nobody teaches you when you're a kid,
Mm.
and it goes back to that phrase, you don't know what you don't know, right?
Mm.
And so every experience, every moment is going to bring you right to a new lesson that you can now take and advance, and step by step, you're going to be able to win that game.
And I think there's a lot more to it to unpack in that one, but thanks for that lesson. I'll move
Yeah.
on to lesson
Good.
number two. Don't believe everything you see.
Yeah, this one is particularly special in my heart
Mm.
because, and I
Mm.
know we've had great conversations about this before, but
Mm.
man, social media, fake news, the way the world is today, even standardized media, there is
Mm.
so much being pushed out that just completely blinds you. And how do you know what's true? I remember growing up in 8th grade, and one of the classes we had to take it was a library course,
Mhm.
and it was all about recognizing credible sources. So how do you recognize an article or an author or a web page, something that is tangible, something that's actually representing real data?
Mm.
And to summarize, there's a whole list of things you can do by checking the credibility of the author, checking the
Yep.
statistics. But when you look at things like BuzzFeed or or
Mhm.
anybody who just posts anything, any
Mhm.
influencer, right? Most of what they're talking about is utter BS, to be entirely
Mhm.
honest with you. And there's a great, I apologize, I don't remember who said it, but there was an individual who had said a quote along the lines of, social media presents the problem that it gives the average everyday person the same credibility to speak as
Mhm.
a Nobel Prize winner, right?
Yep.
And so you have these people who voice their opinions, and that's what they are, opinions, not necessarily
Mhm.
facts. And they pass it along as if they're 100% right, and people will latch onto these ideas. And
Mhm.
so, especially in today's world, not only is there misinformation, disinformation, but there's weaponized media too.
Mm.
And this has been going on for, you know, thousands of years. But just as, a prime example for our American audience, right? Let's take the Boston Massacre, right? Sort of this kickstart to the American Revolution, where it was the 6 individuals who were British soldiers. We all know that story. We're growing up learning about it in U.S. history, and it's painted as this big, bad, horrific incident. But the reality is that these British soldiers were getting harassed and attacked consistently, and at some point, someone said the word fire. It's unknown who, but essentially they fired, and 6 individuals were killed.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, that's tragic, that's horrible, but it was painted into this yellow page journalism through your founding fathers like Paul Revere, through Thomas Jefferson, James Madison, these folks, in order to incite more violence, to incite this uprising in the rest of the colonies, to help unify them and paint the British as these
Mm-hmm.
big, bad enemies, and it was blown way out of proportion, which,
Yep.
you know, we see obviously today where we are and where it
Mm-hmm.
led, but that's just
Mm-hmm.
an example of how it's used, and it's used today in politics all the time,
All
all
the
the
time.
time.
Look, I mean, judging by your educational background, you're trained in journalism, you understand how these things work. But I'll take the other side of this argument then. Sort of, if that's the way it's always been, what's changed? I mean, the reality is that the victor gets to write the history. And you
Mhm,
get to paint the narrative. And in fact, most of these movements and ideas and all that, it's clearly there's two sides to every story. And I'm sure if you're coming from the British side, at the time, they could feel like they were the victims
mhm.
because of this harassment and all that as well. So how do you make sense of the world knowing that everything you read is not just bunk, but also there are complex perspectives to everything that you read? How do you be, sort of remain skeptical, but at the same time trying to make sense of the world so that you can, act or orient yourself in some sort of way to some level of truth?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question, and it does pose a difficult problem, right? Where
Mm,
everywhere you look, how do you know if something's real?
mhm,
And you don't expect them to do, college level citation to understand if it's accurate or not.
mm,
But at the end of the day, right, there's going to be so many different inputs coming your way, right? It's going to come from your friends, it's going to come from your family, it's going to come from your media. In the world where everything is so, all over the place, right? You have to take it with a grain of salt, first and
mm.
foremost.
Yep.
Take everything you read, know multiple sources, right?
Mhm,
There's a big debate in the US constantly about news networks, right? We have
mm,
CNN, we have Fox, we have MSNBC, so many different networks here. Who's telling the truth? Generally, they lean one way or the other.
mm,
And how do you trust it? Well, I always like to take an old school New York Times approach, and I'm not necessarily saying that they get it right, but the old school was the who, what, when, where, and why, right? It's simply the
mm.
facts. There's no
Yep.
way of expressing emotion to it. It simply just says, this is the person, this is what happened, this is when it happened,
Mm.
here's how it happened. But it's once you get to that why, now it's where
So you
things
filter out
are.
the narrative? Is that what you do? Or
I would say,
yeah.
yeah. I think
Mm,
if as soon as you say, so let's just say, gun violence is something that happens all the time in the United States, right?
mhm,
So let's just say that there is shooting of some sort, horrific as it is, but the media is going to paint that differently, right? And it's going
mhm,
to get painted as if we're watching something like CNN, it's going to say, so and so with their assault weapon went down and mowed down, and it's going to have this piece here, right?
mhm,
But then when you go and you look at the other side, it's going to say something along the lines of tragically, so many people died through this horrific event. And now it took off the focus of there was an assault weapon, right? And you see
mm,
it every time because every time there's a shooting, it goes right back to gun control. How are we going to do this? How are we going to do that? And then it becomes a whole debate, right?
mhm,
So you can say the same thing and address that there was a shooting. This is what happened. When you frame it, it's that framing aspect. That's where you're going to get it. So you have to eliminate the narrative
mm.
around it to get to the heart of the story. First and foremost, what was the issue? Did they have mental issues? Was this somebody who shouldn't have been there? And there's so many different elements to it, right?
And they also lie by omission as well, crucial
Oh yeah.
facts that will completely change a narrative.
Yeah.
Look, I'd like to say that I agree with you in that approach. I mean, that probably used to work, I would say 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago.
Yeah.
But the reality is now, they're just naturally presenting inaccurate facts, unresearched
Hmm.
facts, unverified facts. My favorite is a single, uncorroborated, unidentified source says, or
Yeah.
an
Yep.
insider close to the,
Yeah.
and
Whistleblower, this,
so,
that. Yeah.
yeah, whistleblower, this and that. The reality is that integrity is no longer there because the need for clicks and eyeballs and influence and clout far exceeds any form of credibility.
Yeah. Oh, and you
Mm,
make a fantastic point there. And, that's part of doing your own research, obviously, right?
mm.
But, and when I say take things with a grain of salt, because you're 100% right.
So, but we've got to move on. Lesson
Yeah.
number 3: recognize the motive. What do you mean by
Yeah.
that?
Oh, yeah. Taylor's all the time. No one does anything for free,
Mm,
right? There's a motive behind everything and everyone. Why are they
mm,
doing what they're doing? Now, this can go, sometimes there's good motives, sometimes there's bad motives. It can go either way, but there's always a motive, right? And it's a big thing to understand what that motive is. Because
mm,
if you're talking to somebody and their motive is simply money,
mm,
your whole pitch of, pulling on their heartstrings and emotions probably not going to work, right?
mm,
Give them the bottom dollar. Know your audience, right? Know what drives them, because this is going to help you get so much farther in life if you understand the person you're talking to. I mean, if we already started down this whole of politics. If you're talking to somebody who simply just wants to irritate you or just argue for the sake of arguing,
mm,
it's not worth getting all upset and wasting your breath trying to convince this person that you're right, they're wrong, or anything there, because they don't care.
mm,
That's not their motive. That's not their point. They're not there to have an open mind, right? And
mm,
and this exists in everything, but particularly in the corporate world, right?
mm,
What drives them? Are they a family guy or woman? Do they care about just providing for their family? Do they care about having a ton of money? Do they care about seeing the world? What is their motive? I mean, you
mm,
hear it all the time. I'm going to go and I'm going to get a great job. I'm going to work. I'm going to save, and then I'm going to travel the world.
mm, mm.
Well, that's a good motive, but when you start to think about it, you can plug holes here, and there's so many different drivers, so to speak,
Yeah.
of individuals. So recognize that is the big thing. Know that somebody doing something for you rarely, not always, but rarely is for the general good, for your sake. They have some sort of hidden motive that they
Mm,
do, whether it's, extrinsic or intrinsic. There's some reason why they're doing what they're doing. So if you can
mm.
figure that out, you're going to be light years ahead.
Yep. Oh, 100%. And look, I'm not saying that there's no people who have altruistic motives, but generally speaking, people do it for one reason or another, and recognizing the underlying motivation
Hmm.
allows you to, I suppose, grapple with it as well as you could. Some people engage in philanthropy, but they may be motivated out of narcissism. Now, whether or not the motive is noble or not is beside the point. I think so long as you can get the intended outcome, knowing the motive actually helps, right? So yeah, so no, I get that. So recognizing a motive doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't mean a cynical view of the world. It just
No,
means that you got to deal with the world as it is, not as you want it to be.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. It's simple as when you're walking down the street and you see, a homeless individual or an unhoused individual, and you put a little money in their thing. Do you do it to really help them, or do you do it to feel good about yourself, or do you feel guilty not doing it? You know,
Mhm.
really stop to ask these little questions, because I think you're going to learn a lot about the individual, and that it's not as black and white as simply saying, I did this for, you know, a good reason, whatever it is.
100%. Yeah, it's the same reason why I put solar or a solar panel on my roof. It's not to save the world or the environment. I do it because it saves me money. But what difference does it make if it's actually doing good, right? So
Mhm.
there you go. All right, lesson number 4. I really like this one, and it kind of just shows
Yeah.
glimpses of the amount of how well read you are. Know when to be Burr or Hamilton. Now, my knowledge of this probably don't go beyond the musical, so you have to explain this to me.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we're talking American politics, you have your famous rivals that exist time and time again. It's the same with anything, right? But in this particular circumstance, when we're looking back to the founding of the United States, there are, many big name players, ton that are well known, but one of the most recognized feuds was between Aaron Burr and Alexander Hamilton. Now, I'm not diving into their policies or what they believed in, but it's how they handled them, right? when you look at Alexander Hamilton, he was a very young, very bright individual, but he was very outspoken. Every chance he had, he would go and he would be talking and he would express his views and he would debate. He was very much at the center point of attention, right? This sensationalist on his views. And one could call that passion, but he was very outspoken. When we look at just say the Federalist Papers, and I apologize again, it's been a very long time, but he
Mm,
wrote almost 3 times as many as anyone else, whether John Jay or John Adams.
mm,
He wrote, I think, something like, whatever it was. Like it was an absurd amount, right? But
yeah.
then you have Aaron Burr. Now, Aaron Burr was a bit of a chameleon. He was very well spoken. He was, respected. And the part of it was that he knew when to open his mouth. He was not nearly in the same spotlight as Hamilton. He was not nearly as outspoken. If it came down to it, he would share his opinion, but he knew his audience. He knew when to talk and he knew when not to, right? You would not catch him out there posting, paper after paper about this and we need to do this. He was not giving long-winded speeches, but he was
Mhm.
diplomatic. He was working his way through the crowd and it allowed him to be successful. And so this lesson is to know when to be outspoken and when to be a chameleon, when to be quiet, right? Know your audience. As I alluded to before, if you're going to sit there and argue with somebody with no rhyme or reason of any point coming out of it, then you're just wasting your time and theirs.
Mm.
There's no good that's going to come out of it, especially in today's world of social media and everything. Man, you post one thing out there and you're going to get so much hate regardless. So it's recognizing when to be a Hamilton and when to be a Burr, when to be
Yeah.
quiet and when to be outspoken, right?
That's awesome. Now, I've just looked it up. It looks like Alexander Hamilton actually founded the New York Post, which is, one of those media organizations. I can really
hmm
see a journalism connection here that you have a lot of history of. What's interesting to me about that particular that particular point, and I'll play the devil's advocate here, is that
Yeah.
Hamilton's outspoken. He confronted, he pretty much brought the issue to a head. He basically ran towards the fire, and he made the issue. Now, would the revolution, would the War of Independence be successful had Hamilton not existed? I'd argue that Hamilton was very much a catalyst of that, and very much pivotal in his approach if you wanted to succeed in that particular instance. Now, Burr is someone who probably bites his tongue until the right time,
hmm
until the right, and so I think their roles to that both of them played are important roles. I think what your point is not saying one is better than the other, but knowing when to play each of these roles. Now, what's interesting also is that this actually reminds me of a famous Japanese shogun, Tokugawa Ieyasu, who is known for being like Burr, biding his time. And in fact, he pretty much lost every single important battle except for the one that matters.
hmm
Where he beat this Hideyoshi, who was at the time the strongest emperor, and knowing when to bide his time, knowing when to fight his battles, knowing when to sort of keep his real strength hidden until the time where it matters. So, but interestingly, these are very clash of cultures, right? I'd say if I was to take an average American, they would probably be more like Hamilton, and an average Japanese would be more like Burr. So potentially there's a cultural angle to this as well.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's definitely a big cultural piece there,
Mm,
and you're 100% right too. Just kind of going back to what you
mm,
mentioned. I'm not saying one's better than the other, but you have
mm,
to know when the right time for either is, right? And
mm,
there is a cultural component to it. There is the stereotype that Americans, we are very loud, very very outspoken.
mm,
In my experience, you know, France is very much the same way. If they
mm,
don't like you, they will tell you. There's a big thing there where if they say, "Hey, I like you. Let's hang out sometime."
mm,
Over here, that can mean anything. It could just be a very polite brush off, but over
mm,
there, they mean it, right? You could probably expect getting a text from them that night, if not the next
yeah.
day, saying, "Hey, let's get together." So I think that, not just in the sense of knowing when to be outspoken, but there's also a sense of truth to it, right?
Mm,
Now, Hamilton, you're right. We needed him. You do need a catalyst. This is where, change does come from, is when you have these outspoken people who oftentimes are generally not liked right away, right? It takes time to catch your wind, catch your fire, but eventually, if you're someone that's personable enough and people like you and you're charismatic, you'll get
mm,
the following and change will follow. But you also have to know that if you're just trying to gain a following for whatever, and it's not necessarily something that people agree with, then maybe you should take more of the Burr approach and just kind of keep your mouth shut and keep
Well, it's
yourself.
all situational, right? So
Yeah.
that's a if the house is on fire, probably the Hamilton approach would be best. And really, it's your assessment of what's really going on, isn't it?
Yeah,
Mm,
absolutely. And I will say
mm,
this, there's the expression everybody wears a mask, right?
mm,
This kind of ties into motives in this here, but when you go to dinner with your grandma, you're not going to be having the same conversations you will with your friends at the bar at 2 a.m., right?
mhm,
There's a time and there's a place to know how to behave when not to, when you're at school, when you're at work, when you're with your friends. There are things you can talk about. There are things you shouldn't talk about. The biggest thing we're taught growing up, there are three things you don't talk about in public. That's money, religion, and politics, right? Because those are
mhm,
always so divisive. But there are certain circumstances where those are important to talk about. And so it's really just recognizing right place, right time, right audience, right?
mm,
And being able to do that. Just as, another side note, I've worked with many different people in my life. And growing up where I did, everybody leans one way for the most part,
mhm,
and not that I lean the other way, but I didn't necessarily agree with everything that they believed in on that side. And if you were to bring that up, oh, you'd get you would be attacked
mhm,
immediately. So you kinda learn to do it. But later on, after I had known them for a while, if it gets brought up, I would voice my opinion. And they
mhm,
completely accepted it because they recognized me as I was as a person, right? They knew I was
mm,
on their side and that I cared about them and that anything I believed in wasn't an attack, it wasn't against them, it wasn't anything negative. They got to recognize me as an individual first. So I was very much a Burr for most of the beginning of the friendship, and anybody does this, right? You want to be accepted, so you
mm,
conform to being accepted, and then when you have that comfort level, when you get recognized, you can then bring out more of the Hamilton side. You can then
mm,
express yourself a little bit more, and hopefully still be accepted. Maybe not in every case, but everybody does it, right? And that's
mm.
how it usually goes. And occasionally, we all know some people who are just straight Hamiltons. They will tell you to your face everything out the gate, and we love them for a different reason, right? So there's a time and place.
No, 100%. And I'd sort of lament that. I think, unfortunately, one side of politics has all the Hamiltons, and that's how we got this political culture that we have today, where the other side feels like you have to bite your tongue. I would argue that we can probably do with a lot more humility on both sides, because what you're finding is that people have these what's called a preference falsification, whereby
Mhm.
you almost hide your beliefs for the fear that you think everybody else believes in the opposite. So, but we've got to move on. I know
Yeah.
got plenty of rabbit holes this episode, but lesson number 5: hard work is not enough. What do you mean by that?
Yeah, yeah. So similar to what I was saying with playing the game, right? Is we're told growing up, you're going to get an education, you have to work hard, work very hard, and you're going to be successful and you're gonna get a ton of money and you're gonna be here and there. The reality is that's not the way it works anymore, right? Especially when we look at the economy, when we look at inflation, when we look at the value of the dollar, the amount of input that we put in rarely is equal to the output, right? And so at the end of the day, it's not enough to work hard. It's a big piece of it. Don't get me wrong. You need to work hard, but you need to work smart, And when I work sales, you can sit there and you can call and you can dial that phone 300 times in a day, and that's great. That's fine. You might get 15 people who are interested out of those 300, and you just spent your whole day doing it. Or you can recognize your audience. Hey, I'm selling this product. I don't have to waste my time with these individuals. I should be able to focus my time and my energy on this audience. So when I did sales, I worked a lot in academic communities, right, in educational systems. I was not going to be spending as much time in smaller rural areas that have schools where maybe the class size is 10 people, right? Simply because your your audience is so much smaller, you have less of a chance of attacking that. So you prioritize, you strategize, right? You have to be smart and know where to target. You have to know your audience. And so now I would much rather go to a large metropolitan area where a district has dozens of schools, but there's different challenges to both, right? And so it's just recognizing what you need to do. Be smart. AI, it's a great tool. I've seen dozens of people use it now where you don't have to write a whole thing. Get your talking points, use AI, generate the rest, right? And so it's not enough to work hard. You have to work hard and work smart. Maximize efficiency. That is the key phrase, to be honest.
Yep. And yeah, just recognize that there's always a better way of doing things and always look for the patterns. And I think that's good advice. All right, let's move on. Lesson number 6, network, network, network.
Yeah, this is one that, it's taught to you, but I think it's not nearly stressed enough in life. Networking is so vital in everything you do, whether it's professionally or personally. You need a strong social life just as you need a strong professional life, right?
Mm.
So starting with the professional side of things, there is a hierarchy to getting hired,
Yep.
right? This is I will be the biggest cynic about the new way hiring gets done, where it's done with AI. You have to have a resume for every individual job. You have to use these action words and all these different things instead of just having your credentials and letting the recruiter take a look at it. And even then, again, I forgot what the stat was, but it's only like, 5% of resumes will even reach the recruiter, and they only read the top section. They'll only read that summary, or they're not going to read the whole thing. And so having those connections, because it really is who you know, not necessarily what you know. Most
Yep.
skills, and this is not something that we're taught, most skills, most jobs are trainable.
Mm.
They don't like to hear that, but you don't have to go and spend $100,000 at this crazy institute to get the best of a name brand education when you can go to a community college, learn the basics, and then the rest is taught on the job anyway. And now you're, going to start off, $100,000 in debt for something that you could have gotten for a fraction of the cost. Granted, it doesn't have the same appeal as maybe the organization like a Harvard, but you're still going to know the same stuff. But here's where it becomes tough is when we're looking at the hiring pyramid. At your top is always going to be internal hires. That they're always going to look inward. They're going to look people who are dedicated to their organization, who are familiar with it, and they're going to start there. From there, they're going to talk to the referrals, and this is where that networking comes in place. Is having that strong network, right? Go on LinkedIn, see people who do the job you want to do, talk to the recruiter, talk to people in that company, get your advice. If someone's willing to put you up for that job and to say, yeah, I think this would be a good candidate for this position, and they'll send that referral in, you're immediately miles above everybody who does a general application, right?
Mm.
And only once you drop below then, it's going to be your name recognition. So how well are you known as an individual? How well are you recognized in your position? Are you well known across the industry? Do you make a name for yourself? Then below that is going to be your institution's recognition. This is where you have your Harvards, your Columbias, your
Mm.
Yales, these big names where they say, oh, this is a credible institution. We should pick from this. And below that is now your general applications. So when you're looking in the grand scheme of things in this hierarchy, at least 2 of them, if not 3, are going to come from networking, right? So this is where being smart, network, know as many people as you can, but
Yep.
make sure that you're focusing on the ones who are going to get you somewhere, because to know someone random isn't going to help you. But if you have something in mind, if you want to be, whatever position you aspire to be in life, go talk to the people who know. Find a mentor. Find somebody who's going to teach you the life lessons you need, and they will tell you the path to go, right? They will help you. So network in any way you can. Every social event,
Mhm.
online, whatever.
And according to a wise man that we've heard from before, it's not who you know, it's who knows you.
Yeah.
Yeah, and network is about a lot more than just being known. I think it's actually having the relationship to the people
Hmm.
have a stake in helping you out as well. So yeah, look,
Right.
I think you're preaching a converted here, so 100%. Lesson number 7: understand money. All right, what do you mean understanding money?
Yeah. So this is going to be
Mm,
one that's very easy to get into a rabbit hole
mm,
with. So I'll try to keep it
mm,
brief. This is part of that game.
mm,
And knowing how money works. Look, ever since the 1970s, where the US dollar came off the gold standard and now we have it based on oil, we have the petrodollar.
mm,
Basically, the United States went to a debt based system, and it just gave the United States government the license to print as much money as they want.
mm,
And that really hurts the average man, right?
mm,
So you need
mm,
to understand how money works. You need to understand debt in the sense of good debt and bad debt. Most people believe that their house is an asset. In reality, it's a liability. The only thing that is an asset is going to be making you money, right?
mm,
So this is where you have your investments into real estate, or your investments into the stock market, and so many different avenues here. But understanding good debt versus bad debt, because I'm going to let you in
mm,
on a big secret, and people
mm,
hate to hear this. Taxes help no one,
mm.
right?
That's right. Yeah.
So here's the reality is that the money that the government takes, they're just going to abuse it anyway. It never goes where it needs to go. And
Mm,
there's this constant rallying cry for tax the rich. What I will tell you is it will never happen. Ever.
mm,
When they say tax the rich, they're not going to ever tax your Elon Musk, your Jeff Bezos. Granted, they already pay, a lot, but people say they should pay more, they should pay more. It's never going to happen. And the reason why is because that's how it's written in the tax code. It is meant to incentivize them to hire more people, to keep a booming economy, to take risks,
mm,
right? So how do they get so rich then? Well, that's because they understand good debt versus bad debt. If you think any of them are getting a paycheck in the mail every week or every month, whatever, you're wrong. It because that's going to be taxed, right? What they can do is they can use that and they say, well, I have this amount of stock options. You're not going to get taxed on this. I'm going to put this up as a collateral for a loan. You take out a loan and now you can pay that back because you're making your money consistently every month, regardless of your business. So that's going to
mm,
be paid off. But now you just got a huge chunk and it's tax free, right? And this is why so many real estate investors make their money, right? Because you can take out equity, you can do all these different things. And this is where I'm trying not to go down the rabbit hole, but go do your research, go learn things from Robert Kiyosaki. Is very Rich Dad Poor Dad was one of the best
mm,
books I personally read because it changes the way you think about money. You recognize the system and the rat race.
yep,
You'll never reach financial freedom and have financial literacy if you're simply
mm,
working a 9 to 5 and saving. And if I can just extend on this one last little bit here, let's just talk about savings, right? Perfect inflation, or perfect inflation in quotes, is generally 2% year over year on average. If you take $1, let's just say you save $1, you put it into the bank. You know what that dollar is going to be worth next year? 98 cents,
mm,
right? So every year it's going to depreciate. Your buying power is going to get less and less. So, the hour that you worked for that dollar, it means that it's going to buy you less and less. It's going to be worth less in the future. This is why Roth IRAs are so great. It's pre-tax. Taxes are
mm,
only going to go up in the future. Your
mm,
value of your dollar is only going to go down. You need to separate your time from your income. You need to
mm,
have passive income. You need to have money coming in when you're sleeping. You need to be putting in $1 and coming back with at least two, right?
mm,
You can't be just having this direct one to one. Oh, I'm going to work this many hours. I'm going to make this much money. I'm going to throw it in savings. Guess what? In 60 years, it's going to be worth nothing compared to
nothing.
what it is. You need to compound,
Mm,
right? Understand how money works.
yeah, and you need to make investment decisions, right? I like what you said. It's the stuff that gives you constantly generates cash. But
Yeah.
really interesting observation a friend of mine made when he spent a bit of time living in the United States, and it's around the concept of understanding debt. And like how people would just have very little sense when it comes to financial planning, spending money they don't have, putting things on credit cards, which is what you call bad debt. And
Yeah.
it's financial education is absolutely pivotal, and I'd argue it's probably not done very well anywhere
No,
in the Western world.
there is a reason behind that. Look, I'm going to tell you, government does not want you to understand money because now
Oh,
they're going to be at a loss, right? The whole
mm,
point of our educational system is to create good, obedient workers, not
mm,
smart, educated individuals who are capable of critical thinking and understanding how money works. Because when we talk about the fact that the United States is a debt based system, the way
mm,
that that money becomes tangible for the government is through taxes. It's
mm,
through mortgages. It's going to be, these big ticket items where you're paying your interest rate, all these different things. That's how
mm,
they abuse the system on you, the general public. So you need to fight back. Now, I'm the
mm,
biggest anti, I don't think there should be taxes outright. Stay away from
mm.
my money, but it's not really my money now, is it? Right.
Mm,
So knowing how to make your money work for you, right?
mm,
Don't just go and hedge your bets on an Apple stock or
mm,
anything because day trading is impossible, but recognize SPY, the top 500, right?
mm,
That perform. That's constantly changing. The market always trends up. It might dip, it might go down, but it always in the long scheme goes up.
mm,
VLO, QQQ, these index funds,
mm,
recognizing things that follow the market. Real
mm,
estate, the value of homes always goes up
mm,
unless, something catastrophic happens to it. But in general, the housing market as a whole always goes up in valuation. So know your channels, go do your own research. I'm not going to sit here and preach all these different things to anyone listening, but
mm.
at the end of the day, go do your research, go read these books, go learn how to make your money work for you. Because if you're irritated that Uncle Sam takes his greedy hand and sticks it in your pocket every month, it's only going to get worse.
Mm.
And you'll never reach that point unless you mix it up and you start making your money work for you, right?
Indeed. Now, yeah, that's avoid going down the rabbit hole of how the
Mhm.
system's actually rigged and why it's not gonna work for the common man. But we've got to move on. Lesson number 8. I like this one. Facts do not care about your feelings. Now, obviously, this is a very famous quote, initially, I think, attributed to Ben Shapiro, isn't it?
Yeah, yep, yeah. And, this one, a lot of people are not gonna like this one, and
Mm.
that's okay because the reality is no one cares about your feelings, right? You might think people do, and I will be, again, the biggest critic of this, is that we're taught nowadays, "Oh, you're so special, you're so unique." You're not. You're one in 8 billion people on this planet. You share a birthday with so many people. Like, there's nothing special, like in the grand scheme of things. Maybe it's a nihilistic look at it, but it's not, it doesn't affect it, right? Now, there, this can't be confused is that you should always be respectful. You should always be polite. That's just having good upbringing, good manners. That's just human decency. But if you think I am going to go out of my way because something hurt your feelings, you're wrong. I don't do it intentionally. I never will. No one does. But a friendly, oh, it's actually this. Fine. That's respectful. I'm more than happy to accommodate because I respect you as an individual. But if you sit here and you think that the world needs to conform to you and how you believe things and the way that you have this image of yourself, that's pretty ignorant, if you ask me,
Mm.
because you're essentially saying the world needs to conform around you. That's not how it works, right? And so,
How do we get to this point? Like, I mean, this tends to be more of an issue with the younger generations, right? I mean, starting with the millennials, but it seems to have actually gotten worse, hasn't it?
it's there is a really interesting thing here, and I don't want to go down the rabbit hole again, but when we look at the different generations, right, from baby boomers and then we have Gen X and we have millennials and Gen Z, when we look at the trends that happen, so you have, I believe it's called the key and lock generation was Gen X, right?
Mm.
This is the first generation where you have both parents working, so the kids come home from school. They right,
Mm.
hence they go in with the key and the lock, and they now are spending most of their times by themselves. So baby boomers raised Gen X to be pretty strict, right? It's a relatively old school way of parenting. Gen X is a little more strict. So now they are going to raise their kids with more leniency. Well, now we come back to the millennials who have this, which is where kind of a lot of this started of I feel this. It was more about feelings rather than facts, right?
Mm.
I feel offended. I feel hurt. I feel you should do this, all of these different things, right? And it was this constant piece of I need to be recognized, I need to be acknowledged. And so it goes down this whole thing. And then you have this being passed on to Gen Z where they're like, you're so
Mm.
special. Now we
Mm.
give too much attention because they didn't get enough. And now it's you're so special, you're so unique, like the world is your oyster. And it,
Mm.
it creates these generational trends. But the reality is no one quite frankly cares.
Yeah.
Hey, like at the end of the day, if the people you hang out with are causing a problem for you, don't hang out with them.
Mm.
That's as simple as it is, right? Just hang out with the people that you want to hang out with. Don't waste your breath on other folks. Like it's not worth your time. Facts do not care about your feelings. Statistics and history does not care about your feelings. You're you. Congratulations. You be you.
Mhm.
Leave everybody else out of it because they're not going to conform to it. So
So really, it's just a case of, hey, get over it, move on.
pretty
Um,
much.
well, okay, so lesson number 9. Life
Yep.
is not fair, get used to it. That's a good segue, yeah?
Yeah, it ties
Mm.
in very much. Look, you can sit here and you can complain and you can trauma brag all you
Mm.
want and say, I grew up with this and I have this and that. You know what? Life's not fair. All right. If we look at the rates of single parents or criminal activity, when we look at a lot of these statistics, it looks like it's going down the tank year after year. Things are only getting worse. And you hear it all the time. Well, I can't do this because I was born into this situation. It's not fair. Well, you're right. It is not fair. But what are you going to do about it? Are you going to snap your fingers and change history? Are you going to close your eyes and manifest really, really hard? And next thing you know, everything's going to change? No. Life does not care about your feelings. It doesn't. The world's going to go on with or without you. So you might as well make the best of your situation. The fact that you have people around the world without running water,
Mm.
without having suitable homes to live in, but you're complaining because, couldn't, I don't know, get a new phone, the new iPhone 13, or you didn't get this job that you really wanted, but you're living in a home where you have food, you have a house, like privilege in check, right? But at the end of the day, too, you're going to have people who have hundreds of billions of dollars who grew up in a mansion. Like everyone has their own unique story. It's not fair. Nothing's ever going to make it fair. So you have to just make the best of what you have, right? If you have lemons make lemonade, as it always
Mm.
is said. You can't do anything else.
No, well, there's a lot of wisdom to that. And I think, by the time you spent all your energy complaining, you could be doing a lot better with your life. So I like that. Lesson number 10, know your story.
Yeah, so this one kind of comes full circle with all of these because everyone in your life is going to have your own story, right?
Mm.
Whether it's how you were born and raised, whether it's how you came up, whether it's your education, whether it's your passions, it's the experiences that you have. You have to know your own story and you need to own it. The good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, right? But not only do you have to own that, which is, it has its own self-actualizing effect, but this is going to help you get ahead in life because you have to know your story, know why it matters, and you have to know how to get ahead.
Well, tell us about your
Yeah.
story. What do you mean by own what's your story, Cody?
Yeah. Terrific question. So, if we're talking my story, right? I was born to very young parents, both of whom are absolutely incredible. Love them very much. They love me. I was very grateful to have two very caring parents, but they were separated, right? And that does lead to a series of challenges. I do remember growing up and having different times I'm allowed to be at one parent or another's. You move back and forth, and there's obviously challenges that come with that. We moved around a lot because again, young, right? And I will stress this, I am so proud of both of my parents for everything that they have achieved and accomplished from where we were to where we are now. I remember being in a tiny little apartment that wasn't all that great, admittedly. And now to them having their own home, to them making good money. They worked their asses off, quite frankly. And so, but it's challenging when you're growing up in those situations. And so to me, they always taught me, don't make the same mistakes we did. Go and do this. Go get a good education. Go learn. I'm a first generation college student, and that was a big piece of it was having this influence of, hey, if you really want to get ahead, go and get a good education. Go and be smarter than we were. Go get a good job. Don't make the mistakes we made. And similarly, I wasn't taught about money. Most people aren't. They made their mistakes, and granted, they taught me, pay your bills and in the standards, but they didn't understand the way the system worked. It took a lot of doing that own research on my own part. And having these experiences growing up, I moved around a lot. I was the new kid in the neighborhood at one point, and you constantly want to fit in, but you also recognize pretty quick, hey, this is how this person is. This is how this person is. And it's all these little things that allow you to kind of grow up. And I think, thankfully, for better or worse, my individual story of how I came up allowed me to mature sooner. It allowed me to see the world
Mm.
in a different way. It allowed me to understand things that maybe not everyone understood, right? To
Mm.
have some of these challenges. And, I'm grateful that everything that my family did, they worked hard, they figured it out, they laid the groundwork for me, and now I can continue it further and hopefully pass it down in the future, right? But having those experiences and the people that you meet, and there's just so many elements to it, right? Because everything
It
has
makes
it.
perfect sense to me, Cody. The fact that you were there's this constant shift, all these environments you struggle to fit in. I think it allows you to grapple, or you saw the world as it is, so it allows you to actually see the world as it is rather than the way you want it to be. So
Mhm.
you're not one of these entitled millennials that thinks that the world should be bending to their will, but you kind of understood that, kind of life sucks, but there are still things within your control and you grapple with it as it is. So, yeah, I think that explains a lot of how you came to be who you are today, and you should be pretty proud of the what you've become, because I do believe that you are wise beyond your years and the way you see the world at such a young age, and to have such an insight on it. I would say that that's pretty impressive what you've achieved. So well done.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it definitely means a lot, and it's from a lot of the work of the people around me, and, I've obviously enjoyed working with you guys. That has
Mm.
a positive influence in recognizing different things, and you look at it all the time, right? But
Mm.
the side piece is not just recognizing your own story, but know how to make it work for you, right?
Mm.
Because at the end of the day, if you watch Shark Tank, you see it all the time. Well, tell us your story. How'd you come up with this? Or you watch America's Got Talent. Every time there's some sort of story before that leads to some sort of emotional connection to this individual. It works like that in the real world too. That's how you make connections. That's how you make friends. That's how, every failed relationship teaches you a new lesson that you know not to repeat in the next one. So when you have your story, you can understand it, but make it work for you. Know
Mm.
that when you go into a meeting, if you know somebody who grew up, say, who maybe did have separated parents, who did move around a lot, that's now a connection that we have to say, hey, I'm trying to do what you did, right? I have that same aspiration to make something of myself. We had that similar challenge. And now, again, network, right? Now you're that much
That's right.
higher up than where you could have been. And so knowing your story is really an encapsulation of all of these lessons put into one,
Mm.
right? Is to figure it out as you go, but to recognize how it impacts you and to have that introspective look on things.
Love it. Love it. And more so than just knowing your story is owning your own story. And I think there's a profound lesson in that, right?
Mm.
For the longest time, I just didn't realize that I think I knew my story, what I didn't do. And this is part of living in a different culture, was to own that story, knowing that I could be accepted for exactly who I was. Yes, you did. You may not have come from privilege, but you didn't need to. And in fact, if anything, it made you more than you are. I think owning that story is incredibly important, and I love how you do. You have owned your story, and I think you'd be better off for accepting who you are, and people would know exactly what you're about. So thanks for sharing that. And that concludes the 10 lessons. Now, usually we do throw in a curveball about what you've unlearned, but I think I'll leave a couple more years before I come back to you for what you've unlearned in your life. But thank you for joining us today, Codie. It's been an absolute pleasure talking to you.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Jeff. It's a real pleasure to chat with you as well. I'm happy to be on this side for once and be able to share these lessons from my, albeit young, but experienced life.
Well, thanks for that. And that's all for today's episode of 10 Lessons Learned. A big thank you to our guest, Codie Comeau, for sharing your incredible life and lessons. Now, thanks to our amazing team, Wang, who manages our marketing, social media, our producer, Robert Hostry. This podcast is supported by the Professional Development Forum for listeners like you. We'd love to hear your thoughts on today's lessons. Drop us a line at podcast@10lessonslearned.com. That's podcast@10lessonslearned.com. So if you've enjoyed that episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notifications so that you'll never miss a lesson that could change your life. Thanks for tuning in to 10 Lessons Learned. We're making the world wiser, one lesson at a time.